Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the heavy pistol pressed against my temple was ice cold, but the eyes of the man holding it burned with a heat that could scorch the earth. Give me one reason, the deep voice rumbled, vibrating through the floorboards and straight into my chest. Why I shouldn't paint this wedding suite with your brains, little spy. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, not from fear, but from a biological imperative I didn't yet understand. 30 minutes ago, I had been Silas Thorne, a corporate fixer in New York, bleeding out in an alleyway after a deal went south. Now, I was apparently Julian Wexler, a disgrace of a noble son, currently kneeling in a shredded wedding suit before a man who looked like he wanted to tear my throat out with his teeth. I swallowed the metallic taste of fear and forced my chin up. Because, I rasped, my voice foreign to my own ears, if you kill me, you'll never find the explosive charge sewn into the lining of your dress coat. The man, Archduke Draven Caliph, the so-called Butcher of the North, froze. His pupils, slit and feral, dilated. He wasn't surprised by the threat. He was surprised that the trembling, sweet-scented creature he'd been forced to marry had the audacity to speak it. This was no corporate boardroom. This was the empire of Ethelgard, and I had just woken up in hell. The memories of the body's original owner, Julian, had hit me like a freight train the moment I opened my eyes. I wasn't just in a different country. I was in a different reality. This was a world governed not by logic or currency, but by secondary genders, alpha, beta, omega. And I, the man who had brought Fortune 500 companies to their knees with a whisper, was now an omega. A rare subgender prized for fertility and submission, and cursed with a fragility that made me want to laugh bitterly. Julian Wexler had been a pawn. His father, a corrupt count, had sold him to the Archduke to act as a spy, a honey trap designed to leak military secrets during the heat of the night. But Julian had been terrified. He had planned to take the poison hidden in his ring before the bonding could happen. I, however, had no intention of dying twice in one day. Draven lowered the gun slowly, his gaze raking over me. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. It smelled of ozone, burnt cedar, and blood, his scent. It was an aggressive, dominant pheromone meant to force me into submission, to make me bare my neck. My body wanted to obey. A sickening wave of heat pooled in my lower belly, my instincts screaming at me to appease the predator. I dug my fingernails into my palms until the skin broke, using the sharp pain to anchor my mind. You're lying, Draven growled, though he didn't pull the trigger. He tossed the gun onto the velvet chaise and stalked toward me. He was massive, easily 6'4", built like a siege engine in a military dress uniform. You are Count Wexler's shivering little useless son. You don't know the first thing about explosives. I know that for smells like marzipan when it's unstable. I lied smoothly, channeling every ounce of Silas's confidence. And I know your left pocket is sagging slightly more than the right. Your tailor is impeccable, Archduke. The anomaly is in the weight. It was a bluff. Mostly. I had smelled the faint chemical trace when he first grabbed me, a scent that didn't belong amidst the cedar and ozone. In my past life, I knew bombs. In this life, I had to pray the physics remained the same. Draven narrowed his eyes. With a swift, violent motion, he ripped off his heavy coat and threw it across the room. He drew a dagger from his belt and sliced into the lining of the coat. A small, flat disc slid out, blinking rapidly. The silence that followed was deafening. Draven looked at the device, then back at me. The murderous rage in his eyes cooled into something far more dangerous, curiosity. The timer isn't active, he noted, his voice devoid of emotion. But it is live. My father intends for me to be a widow before the honeymoon is over, I said, standing up. My legs shook, the omega biology betraying me, but I forced myself to walk to the side table and pour a glass of water. He thinks you're a monster who will break me. He wants your territories, and he needs a martyr to rally the Senate against you. My death, or yours, serves him equally well. Draven watched me drink. The predatory intensity of his stare felt like a physical weight. And you? What do you want, Julian? I set the glass down. I want to live. And to do that, I need to make a deal with the devil. I am not a devil. Draven stepped closer, the pressure of his aura increasing until the air felt heavy as water. He trapped me against the table, his hands planting on either side of my hips. I am an alpha, and you are an unmarked omega in my territory. You do not negotiate. You submit. The word submit hit my nervous system like a shock. My knees buckled, my head tilting to the side involuntarily to expose the scent gland on my neck. It was a biological override, a hard-coded command in my DNA. Fight it, I screamed internally. Asterisk, I am Silas Thorne. I do not kneel. Asterisk. I am not your pet. I gritted out, sweat beading on my forehead as I fought the instinct. I grabbed his lapel, not to push him away, but to hold myself upright. I looked him dead in the eye. I am your partner. Or I am your corpse. Choose. Draven stared at me, stunned. For a second, the crushing weight of his pheromones lifted. He leaned in, inhaling the scent at the crook of my neck, a scent I later learned was wild orchid and frost, and whispered, "Partner, you can barely stand under the weight of my presence." "Then stop flexing," I snapped. A low, rumbling sound erupted from his chest. It took me a moment to realize he was chuckling. It was a dark, rusty sound. "Interesting. The rumors said you were a delicate flower. They didn't mention the thorns." He pulled back, the suffocating pressure receding. "Keep the coat. Disarm the device if you're so clever. If you survive the night, we'll talk about this deal." He turned and walked toward the door. "Oh, and Julian?" "Yes. Don't think this saves you. If I smell betrayal on you, even for a second, I won't need a gun." The door slammed shut, the lock clicking with finality. I slid down the side of the table, gasping for air, trembling as the adrenaline crashed. Welcome to the omegaverse. I hated it already. The next 3 weeks were a lesson in psychological warfare. The ducal estate, Blackwood Manor, was a fortress of stone and iron nestled in the frozen peaks of the Northern Territory. The servants were efficient, silent, and looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. To them, I was just another Southern trophy, destined to break under the harsh winter and their harsher master. I spent my days in the library, devouring books on history, politics, and this cursed biology. I learned about heats, debilitating cycles of fertility that reduced omegas to mindless creatures of need, and ruts, the alpha equivalent of violent, possessive madness. I learned that an alpha's bite on the gland created a permanent bond, a psychic link that made betrayal nearly impossible. I avoided Draven. He avoided me. But the tension in the house was a taut wire waiting to snap. The deal remained unspoken, but active. I had disarmed the bomb, a simple pressure trigger, thankfully similar to Earth tech, and left it on his desk the next morning with a note. Asterisk, your security chief is on my father's payroll. Check his bank accounts. Asterisk. 2 days later, the head of security disappeared. A new one was appointed. Draven never thanked me, but the quality of food sent to my room improved, and the guards stopped sneering when I walked past. But the peace couldn't last. The biology of this world was a ticking clock. It happened during the winter solstice ball. The ballroom was a sea of velvet, jewels, and hypocrisy. High society had gathered to inspect the butcher's new bride. I wore a high-collared suit of midnight blue, designed to hide the unbitten skin of my neck. "Smile, Julian," a voice hissed in my ear. I turned to see my father, Count Wexler. He was a slender man with a smile like a viper. He gripped my arm, his fingers digging into the muscle. "You look healthy. I assumed Draven would have used you up by now. He has high standards," I replied coolly, pulling my arm away. "Perhaps he prefers quality over easy access." Wexler's eyes narrowed. "Do not get clever with me, boy. Have you found the access codes to the Northern Defense Grid? Work in progress. Ideally, I'd like to survive the theft." "You have 3 days," Wexler whispered, stepping closer. He reeked of cloying perfume masking a sour beta scent. "Or I will release the information about your mother." My blood ran cold. Julian's mother was in a sanatorium, the only leverage Wexler had kept over his son. The original Julian would have wept. I just felt a cold, calculating rage settle in my chest. "Touch her," I said softly, "and I will burn your house down with you inside it." Wexler laughed. "With what fire? You are an omega. You are nothing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial. Before I could react, he uncorked it, and splashed the contents onto my chest. It wasn't acid. It was worse. A sweet, pungent aroma exploded into the air. Concentrated omega pheromones. Synthetic heat in a bottle. Let's see how the butcher handles a bitch in heat in the middle of his ballroom, Vexler sneered, backing away into the crowd. The effect was instantaneous. My temperature spiked to a fever pitch within seconds. My vision blurred. A deep, aching hollowness clawed at my stomach, a desperate need to be filled, to be claimed. My knees hit the marble floor. Around me, the chatter stopped. Heads turned. Then, the scent hit the alphas in the room. Dozens of pairs of eyes dilated. I could hear low growls starting, the sound of civilized men reverting to beasts. The air grew thick with conflicting dominance pheromones, musk, spice, aggression. They looked at me not as a person, but as prey. Mine, someone growled nearby. A hand reached for me. Get up, I told myself. Get up, Silas. But my limbs were water. The biological imperative was a tsunami washing away my will. I let out a whimper, a sound I despised, curling into myself. The crowd parted violently. It wasn't a push. It was a shock wave of pure, unadulterated power. A scent of ozone and burnt cedar crashed into the room, so potent it tasted like iron on the tongue. The alphas reaching for me flinched back, whining like kicked dogs. Draven stood there. He wasn't wearing his dress uniform coat. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, revealing the cords of muscle in his neck. His eyes were entirely black, the irises swallowed by the pupil. He looked terrifying. He looked magnificent. Who? Draven spoke, his voice a low vibration that rattled the chandeliers, touched him. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Draven walked toward me. The other alphas scrambled back, pressing themselves against the walls, submitting to the apex predator. He stopped in front of me. The heat radiating from him was intense, but unlike the others, his scent didn't make me feel dirty. It made me feel safe. It made me feel owned. Yes, but protected. Julian, he growled. I looked up, sweat matting my hair to my forehead. Draven. I didn't. Quiet. He knelt. He didn't grab me roughly. He slid one arm under my knees and the other behind my back, lifting me effortlessly into the air. I buried my face in his neck, inhaling the cedar scent, trying to ground myself. Count Vexler, Draven called out without looking around. My father was trying to sneak toward the exit. He froze. If you are still in my territory by sunrise, Draven said, his voice carrying the weight of a death sentence, I will hang your skin from the gates of this manor. He turned and carried me out of the ballroom. The journey to the master bedroom was a blur of fever and need. The synthetic pheromones were ravaging my system. I was burning up, my mind fracturing into basic instincts. Asterisk nest. Mate. Bond. Asterisk. Draven kicked the door shut and carried me to the massive four-poster bed. He dropped me onto the sheets, but he didn't climb on top of me. He stood by the bed, gripping the wooden post until I heard the wood crack. Draven, I gasped, writhing on the silk. The friction of the sheets was agony. I needed his weight. I needed his teeth. Please. No. His voice was strained, a guttural growl. You were drugged. You cannot consent. I don't care about consent. I screamed, my voice breaking. It hurts. It feels like my blood is boiling. Help me. If I touch you now, I won't stop, Draven snarled, his restraint fraying. I will bite you. I will not you. I will bind you to me for the rest of your miserable life. Is that what you want, spy? To be shackled to the monster. I looked at him through the haze. He was shaking. He was fighting his own biology, fighting the urge to claim the vulnerable Omega in front of him, purely out of some twisted sense of honor. He didn't want a slave. He wanted an equal. And in that moment, I realized he was the only man in two worlds worth submitting to. I crawled across the bed, my movements clumsy and desperate. I reached out and grabbed his hand, pulling it against my burning cheek. I am not a victim, I whispered, forcing my eyes to focus on his. I am Julian. I am Silas. And I am choosing this. I pulled his hand down to my neck, right over the pulsing gland. Bite me, Draven. Claim me. Make me yours so I can help you burn them all down. Something snapped in his eyes. The blackness swallowed the last of the gold. As you command, he whispered. He crashed onto the bed, covering my body with his. His mouth found my throat, hot and wet. The pain was sharp, a sudden puncture as his canines broke the skin, but it was immediately followed by a rush of endorphins so powerful my vision went white. The bond slammed into place. It wasn't a shackle. It was a bridge. I could feel him, his rage, his protectiveness, his solitude. And he could feel me, my calculation, my ambition, my fear. The night became a blur of teeth and skin, of demands met and power exchanged. For the first time, I wasn't plotting or strategizing. I was simply existing, anchored by the man who was now irrevocably part of my soul. The morning sun was blinding. I woke up sore, my body feeling heavy and thoroughly used, but the fever was gone. The chaotic noise in my head had quieted. In its place was a low, steady hum at the back of my mind. Draven. I sat up. I was alone in the massive bed. Panic flared for a second, but then I felt it, a wave of reassurance through the bond. I am here. The door to the balcony was open. Draven stood there, wrapped in a black silk robe, looking out over the snowy expanse of his domain. He held a cup of coffee in one hand. I climbed out of bed, ignoring the ache in my hips, and wrapped a sheet around myself. I walked out to join him. He turned as I approached. There were scratch marks on his chest, bruises on his neck. I had done that. He didn't smile, but his eyes were warm. He handed me the coffee. Drink. Bossy, I muttered, taking the cup. The warmth spread through my hands. The Count has fled the capital, Draven said, looking back at the snow. My scouts say he is heading for the border. He won't make it, I said, sipping the coffee. It was black, bitter, perfect. I transferred his offshore funds to a charity account for war orphans last night while you were asleep. He has no money to pay his mercenaries. They'll turn on him by noon. Draven looked at me, an eyebrow raised. You were accessing banking terminals? I thought you were unconscious. I multitask. Draven laughed, a genuine, rich sound that seemed to melt the snow on the railing. He reached out, his thumb tracing the bite mark on my neck. Now a scarring claim that marked me as the Archduke's consort. You are dangerous, Julian. I told you. I leaned into his touch, the bond singing with contentment. I'm not a pet. No, Draven agreed, pulling me closer until my forehead rested against his chest. You are the wolf in sheep's clothing I didn't know I needed. And you, I murmured, listening to the steady beat of his heart, are the only thing standing between this empire and total collapse. We have a lot of work to do, he said. We do. I looked up at him. The power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just the Omega consort. I was the strategist behind the throne. He provided the might. I provided the mind. But first, I said, narrowing my eyes. About that wedding you ruined. I'll buy you a new suit, he dismissed. I want a seat on the War Council. Draven paused. He looked at me, really looked at me. Most alphas would have laughed. Draven just smirked. Earn it. I intend to. The wind howled around the stone towers of Blackwood Manor, but I didn't feel the cold. I had fire in my blood and a monster at my side. Let the Empire try to break us now. And that is how the spy conquered the butcher, not with a weapon, but with a will of iron wrapped in silk. If you enjoyed seeing Julian bring the Archduke to his knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, if you were in Julian's shoes, would you have chosen to bond with Draven to survive, or would you have risked death for freedom? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Tall muscular alpha, black military uniform undone at collar, dark hair, glowing golden eyes, possessive expression, biting the neck of man 2, large hands gripping man 2's waist. Man 2, slender omega, fair skin, silver hair, white silk shirt falling off shoulder revealing bite mark, head tilted back in ecstasy and pain, clutching man 1's shoulders. Background is a dimly lit luxurious Gothic bedroom, moonlight streaming through balcony doors, scattered rose petals, dramatic chiaroscuro lighting, intense atmosphere, cinematic composition, sharp focus, intricate details.